Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, October 23rd, 2008. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week we get brewing tips from two Colorado breweries, Odell Brewing Company and Great Divide. Brewers from those fine establishments take a few minutes with Andy and me to talk about their beers and to give us some pointers on how we can improve our own. Well, if you're new to home brewing or would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Just a note, the Brewers logbooks are probably going to go to print this week. So keep your eyes peeled for those coming up very soon. Also, a new DVD coming up. So stay tuned for that. I've been adding pictures on our gallery page on basicbrewing.com from our trip out in Colorado. So be sure to check that out. And if you have pictures you want to share with us of you and us, or with you and your Basic Brewing shirt, let me know. We'll put you up there. I forgot to mention one fun coincidence last time that happened on our trip to the Great American Beer Festival, Colorado. When Andy and I sat down on the plane leaving Northwest Arkansas, I heard my name from somewhere behind me, and I turned around, and sitting directly behind me in the plane was Jason from Pea Ridge. Now, fans of the archives will remember Jason because he was one of the brewers that I joined for the Blind Mice Brew way back in 2005. Now, what was interesting was that Jason wasn't even going to the festival. He was just making a connection in Denver, so that makes it extra coincidental. So it was great to see Jason again. It's been almost exactly 3 years. It'll be 3 years next month that we all got together around Thanksgiving and mashed in Casey's living room, Casey Letelier's living room. Speaking of whom, I got an email this week from Casey, the host of the Blind Mice Brew Session. Casey had heard the conversation that Chris Colby and I had about how to get the most out of your hops, and that inspired him, I guess, or he was probably already thinking about that kind of stuff. He's an advanced brewer. Anyway, he took the opportunity to send an audio file of some tips on hop-saving techniques.
Hi, James. This is Casey in Oxford, formerly Casey in Siloam Springs. I was thinking about the show you did with Chris Colby about hop-saving ideas, getting the most bittering and the most aroma potential out of the same hops. So one way I was thinking this can happen is actually using those hops in two separate beers. I don't know about you, but for me, I don't get nearly as many brew days as I'd like, and so when I get one, I try to cram as much in there as I can. And that often means either a double batch with two separate mashes, or I'll collect two separate runnings from the same mash and make two different beers. So a month or so ago, I brewed a porter and collected the first runnings from that mash, and then ran off another set of runnings and had enough for a mild. So the porter's 1050, gets two hop additions, an ounce of Northern Brewer at 60 minutes and an ounce at 15. So once that beer was finished, I took those hops out and boiled them with the mild, and ended up with 1050 porter and a 1030 mild. And even though there was no additional hops for the mild, other than those that had already been boiled, it ended up with a nice level of hop character. And as much as saving an ounce of hops is great, the place where it feels like this could actually be a major hop savings is doing something like an IPA followed up with something stronger. So for my IPAs anyway, I'm often adding 4 or 5 ounces high alpha American hops right at flame out. So great utilization of their aroma potential, but the bittering potential just wasted. Usually I just throw those out after that. But if you follow that up with an imperial stout or a barley wine and move those hops over and boil them with the second beer, then you're getting their bittering potential that should be plenty of hops for kind of getting up to that 100 IBU threshold for an Imperial Stout, and hops that essentially would normally just be wasted. I haven't tried this yet, haven't had enough free fermenter space, but I thought I'd toss it out there, and if someone else gives it a shot, I'd love to hear how it goes. All right, thanks, James. Keep up the good shows.
I think Casey's picked up a bit of an English accent there, don't you think? I went back and listened to the original Blind Mice Brew from 3 years ago, and I think Casey's being anglicized over there. I appreciate you sending that note, Casey, and that's great advice. If you're making a beer where you're hopping the heck out of it at the end of the boil, the bitterness potential is still going to be in those hops, so you can use those hops for bittering in another beer. That means, brewing 2 batches in one day, but if you can get the second one as an extract brew, maybe you can speed up the process. So, very interesting. Appreciate the clip again, Casey. Well, this comes from Brian in Thousand Oaks, California. Brian says, before I put together a brewing Christmas list, I want to know if it's realistic to brew in a small 2-bedroom condo. My wife is concerned that there might be a smell as it ferments. I'm planning on putting the fermenting carboy or pail in my laundry room next to the dryer, which is 10 feet from our bedroom. I've been gauging the temperature over the past few weeks, including when I'm using the dryer, and the temperature range is from 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Is this an okay environment for good brewing? And does the fermentation phase smell? Well, first, Brian, I think it is practical to brew in a small condo. Lots of brewers do that. And as far as I'm concerned, I love the smell of a brew day. The hops and malt smell boiling in the kettle, that just smells great to me. The only time I've had trouble was when my wife was pregnant and her nose was a little more sensitive than usual. But other than that, I think it's great. Now, some yeast strains can smell a bit sulfury coming out of the airlock, but in my experience, those are mostly lager yeast strains and not ale yeast strains. So ale yeasts, again, to me, smell great as they're working. You'll get kind of sweet, sometimes hoppy smells coming out of the airlock, and I don't think it should be a problem. The one thing that I would worry about is the proximity to the dryer, though. Temperature control is very important in brewing. You really want to try to keep your fermentation temps, for ales at least. I try to keep them in the upper 60s to lower 70s Fahrenheit, if at all possible, and that's without aid of extra refrigeration. So that's around 20 degrees Celsius. So having the fermenter that close to the dryer, that may be a concern. But other than that, small spaces can work for you. You might want to think about starting with small batches, maybe a gallon or two, until you get your processes nailed down and you kind of understand what you actually will need for brewing. Well, here's an appropriate note along the same lines from Adam in Kansas City. Adam says, I live in downtown Kansas City and brew in my loft. Needless to say, since I do live in a loft, I'm very limited to space, and everyone that brews can tell you how much space it starts to take up. See, that's a good point. You don't have to have a bunch of gear to brew well. It just kind of happens over time. Anyway, Adam says, just as my girlfriend that lives with me, just ask my girlfriend that lives with me. She'll tell you all about it. So the only space that I have to store fermenters and equipment is a closet where the air conditioner heating unit sits. I custom-built a shelf that fills up every inch of space so nothing goes to waste. Adam says, one day I got a letter from the Homeowners Association about how they have to come in and check my heater for some reason or another. I obviously didn't think about this at the time, but I sure did wonder why the Homeowners Association was going to, what they were going to say to me. I just picture a maintenance guy opening the door and seeing 2 bubbling carboys with blow-off tubes going into one big bucket, and the remainder of the space stacked to the ceiling in aging brew. Adam says, I came home expecting to see my place taped off. If a person didn't know what it was, I could see how they would freak out a bit. 2 glass containers gurgling into a bucket. Says nothing ever comes from it, or nothing ever came from it. To this day, I still wonder what the look on this person's face was when they opened this small closet to see a brew operation going on. Well, there is that. You know, maybe the maintenance guy was a home brewer. You never know. Again, Adam does have a point that over time you can accumulate a lot of stuff, but you don't have to start out with a bunch of stuff to brew in a small space. It just kind of happens that way. So explain to your maintenance guy what you're doing. Hugh from New Westminster, British Columbia, Canada writes, in the episode for January 3rd, 2008, you and Andy brewed 2 batches Party Guile using leftover ingredients. This creativity really appeals to me, and once I've got some more batches under my belt, it's something I'd really like to try. However, I'm wondering how they turned out. Good, bad, interesting? It's been a while since we talked about those beers. We actually tried those the other night. The big beer is just amazing. The hops have kind of mellowed over time, but it's matured into a kind of a very nice Russian Imperial Stout type of beer. It's roasty, chocolatey, big and thick and wonderful. Just amazing. The small beer is good, but not as exciting. It's it's more of a Pepsi kind of experience compared to the big beer, but still it's a very nice session beer. So I think Party Guile Brewing is a lot of fun. We got to do that again. But first, now let's go on to our interviews. You know, whenever we can, we like to pick the brains of professional brewers to get tips on how to make our beers better. And the first stop that Andy and I made on our little trek through Colorado was Odell Brewing Company in Fort Collins. We're big fans of their IPA. We sort of dropped in and ordered a couple of flights of their pilot samplers. And afterward, head brewer Jake O'Mara was kind enough to sit down for a chat. Well, Jake O'Mara, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Andy Sparks is here as well.
Always fun to be here, James.
Now, we've gone through your first pilot tray earlier, and we're sampling some of the co-pilot tray. Now, tell us about these beers. These are not beers that have gone through the full production round, right?
Correct. These are beers that we brew on our pilot system, the 5-barrel pilot system that creates roughly 10 kegs at a time. It's only available in-house here at the brewery. Occasionally you might be able to find one outside locally in Fort Collins, but most of the time it's only here. I guess with the exception of the co-pilot tray, our double Pilsner, we did package in bottles, and we would do once a year, but now we're not brewing that anymore as of right now, so we still have some on tap, and that's why it makes its way onto the co-pilot tray, but it's still a very popular beer, especially amongst everyone here at the brewery.
Now, you're the head brewer.
Yes.
Now, tell me about your background. How did you come here?
I don't have a background in brewing, actually. I was hired part-time bottling. Just expressed interest in everything that goes on here and worked my way up, attending lots of seminars and conferences and reading as much literature as I could. But just kind of worked my way up. That's a lot how we do things here is we'll start someone off and then work them way up throughout the company, which makes it good for us so we know we can train everyone the way we want them, and things usually work out pretty well that way.
You don't have to untrain anybody that way.
Yeah, which can be difficult. I know if I went somewhere else, I would be hard to untrain. Yeah.
Did you do any home brewing at all before you came here?
No, actually, I did not. I didn't really have any idea of how things worked. But since then, I've done a little bit of home brewing, and not a whole lot.
Well, let's talk about your one of my favorite beer of the last flight, and that was the Cup of Joe. And that to me was a wonderful beer. We'll talk about your beer.
The Cup of Joe? The Cup of Joe is from our Imperial Stout, which, along with our Double Pilsner, was a single batch series, so we'd make it during the winter, bottle it, and send it out. We ended up with some extra this year, so we've been aging some in wood barrels, some in some bourbon barrels, And then Cup of Joe is named after a guy here in retail, brewed up a lot of different styles of strong coffee and mixed it with the Imperial Stout. So I think the last time I knew, he did 8 different kegs of different coffees with the Imperial Stout. So, and they all have their pretty unique flavor too. You can tell the differences in the coffees.
So how did you add the coffee? Was it brewed coffee that was added to the keg?
Yep, brewed coffee added to the keg, and then we just gravity filled the keg off the fermenting vessel.
So do you know the ratio of beer to coffee?
I do not know the ratio of beer to coffee. It's off the top of my head, I would say, I don't know, maybe a half gallon of coffee. I'm not quite sure, though. Don't quote me on that. So
a half gallon to, say, 15 gallons of beer. I'm asking you because people will be asking me through email afterwards if I don't ask you.
All right.
Well, it was delicious. It had just the right balance of coffee, didn't you think, Andy?
Yeah, it had some nice coffee notes, real roasty character, which comes from the stout. But it was also nice because it was hand pulled, so it's really soft and smooth.
Oh, that's right. It's on the beer engine, so that does make a difference too.
Well, that helps. Well, tell us about the double Pilsner here.
Well, the double Pilsner we came up with, we wanted to make something really light, but with a high alcohol content that people could drink and was drinkable. It's hard to describe. You got to kind of drink it, I think, to appreciate it, because it looks very light in color, almost Budweiser color, but it definitely packs a punch at 8.1% alcohol. And we did use our hop back with it, with whole leaf Tettnang hops, and a lot of Saaz and Tettnang in the boil.
Yeah, it is pretty hoppy for a Pilsner.
Yeah, and it doesn't taste anywhere near an 8%. I wouldn't have thought it was 8% drinking it. So
no. So how do you achieve that lightness with that much gravity?
Well, normally for our normal beers, we have a 50-barrel brew house, and we'll brew 2 batches on the brew house to fill 100-barrel fermenter. But with the single batch series, the Pilsner and the Stout, we brewed 3 times on the 50-barrel system at about 35 barrels each time to fill our 100-barrel fermenters. So it was roughly 3,000 pounds of malt per 35 barrels. So it's quite a bit.
So are there any adjuncts in there to keep it that light?
Nope, no adjuncts. It was dominated by Pilsner malt with some Cara foam and I believe a little bit of wheat. I think a little bit of wheat. So,
what's your mash temperature like? I mean, you've got to be doing something special to that beer, or else it would be.
We do a single infusion mash. We shot for 150 degrees with that, plus or minus 1 degree.
Wow. And lagered it, obviously.
Yes, lagered. We had brought in an in-house, or a different yeast strain, because we do all ales, so this was definitely a Pilsner lager yeast strain.
Wow. Oh, it's delicious.
Yeah, very nice.
It's, like I said, it would sneak up on you pretty quickly.
Right.
That can't. I'm very surprised that is 8.1% alcohol. And we're hurrying along because you're in the middle of something, I know. So I appreciate you're taking this much time. Tell us about this beer.
This is the Bridget's Red. It was brewed on our 5-barrel system. And they're going to enter this beer in the Pro-Am competition at the Great American Beer Festival. One of the I don't know if he was local. Maybe he was local home brewer. I'm not sure. Brewed this with Doug Odell.
Okay.
And it's a red style. I don't know. I don't have the brew log in front of me. I can't tell you a whole lot about it. I knew there was some dark malt.
Yeah, it's got 20% malted rye. It says so. That's probably what I'm picking up there.
Yeah, there's something unique about it. I can't quite put my finger on it, but then rye is one of those things you don't taste a lot in beers. So it's unique.
Yeah. It's delicious. Again. Well, talk to us about a beer that you do know about that we tried the other night at Andy's house, and we're just like blown away, and I'm sure he's chomping at the bit.
Yeah.
But the IPA, talk to us about that.
The IPA came up, again, on our 5-barrel system. We brewed a number of test batches. I guess I should start in the beginning. We tasted a lot of IPAs. We bought as many as we could find and described, we had big tastings, what we like, what we don't like about various styles and different companies' IPAs. And then we started brewing them on the pilot system and then narrowed it down to what we liked and didn't like again. And we came up with the final product, which Andy had. And it's a pretty light copper color, 7% alcohol. So it's not too outrageous, but it definitely goes a little bit above the norm. We kettle hop with Chinook and Pearly during the boil and post-boil for Whirlpool and rest. And then our hop back, we run Amarillo and Centennial whole leaf hops. And then we dry hop with Simcoe, Amarillo, and Centennial. So it's a lot of hops. Off the top of my head, I don't know pounds of hops per barrel, but it's a lot. I would say probably, I don't even know, probably like 7 or 8 pounds per barrel.
So what is the key to getting that much hoppiness in a beer like that? Is it just adding a lot of hops?
It's a lot, and what did I say? Dry hop
Simcoe, Amarillo, and Centennial.
And in the boil, the Chinook are a pretty high alpha hop. They're pretty strong, and we do use quite a bit of that. The Pearly is a moderate alpha, and that's not during the boil, but it still adds a lot of aroma, and we use quite a bit of that as well.
Well, it's just an amazing IPA. It makes me wonder what the commercial examples that you guys tasted that you thought were the best.
Let me think. Stone was always a favorite. Green Flash, that was a while ago. I'm going to have to pull it out of the archives. That was a few years ago. What else? Let me think. I was a fan of Dogfish Head's IPAs. I think they do a really good job. Locally, Avery, I really enjoy their beers, so that was a favorite. I don't know. I can't think of the rest.
Well, you guys did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
It makes me hope that you guys' distribution is going to, come our way.
Yeah.
Are you guys working on that? How's that coming?
We're not headed, I don't think, that far east right now. I know we're in the surrounding states, but it's pretty limited outside of Colorado. I think we're still just trying to concentrate on Colorado. There's still people here that haven't heard of us. Just trying to reach that demographic, I guess you could say. But I'm not really involved in that too much as far as how we're going distribution-wise. So
you just stack up the pallets and let somebody else wonder where they're going.
Yeah, just make the beer and let it go on its way.
Well, this is your is it? Do you say Rauch beer or Rauch beer?
Well, I've heard both terms. I would say Rauch beer. But this, again, was brewed by Doug Odell. And it's a very unique beer. You use a lot of smoked malt in it, and it definitely comes through. Not much hop character, but it definitely is almost dominated, I think, by that smoke character.
Yeah. Yeah, it says on the little tag here that it was brewed with 30% beechwood smoked malt from Bamberg, and there's really a lot of bacony character in the beer.
Yeah, it's nice. And one of the things that I've noticed with smoked beers a lot of times is the smokiness comes through way too strong, especially in homebrewed smoked beers. This has got a really nice balance. It's not too smoky, but I know what you're talking about. It's almost like there's bacon in the back.
Yeah, I bet the brewery smells good when this is going on.
Yeah, that definitely. It had a unique aroma around the brewery when he was boiling the wort for sure.
So do you know much else about this beer?
I do not. Again, sometimes without the brew logs in front of me, I have a hard time if I didn't brew it myself, I don't know. I don't.
Yeah, I know the feeling. Even with my own beers that I've brewed, I I have to go back to my notes, see what was happening that day. What beers have you had? Are there beers that you've come up with that you've influenced most?
Just again on a pilot system. I just brewed our second installment of our woodcut series, which is slated to come out, I think, in March. It's going to be a strong golden ale. We're shooting for a pretty big alcohol percentage, around 10 to 10.3, I believe. Our first woodcut went over really well. That was 10-1. It was an old ale style, darker in color, really malty. And this one we're shooting for a little lighter, or a lot lighter, I should say, not a little. A little more hop character compared to the first woodcut. And I just made that yesterday. I try to brew on the pilot system when I can. I've had a brown ale that's gone over really well. That was called Tall Tale Brown Ale. I usually try to get that once a year. And the last one I brewed that was my favorite was a dark lager. I was trying to go for the, Negro Modelo style. Not so much Mexican in style, but that influenced by that beer was
kind of a Vienna lager kind of a thing.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
So which is harder to make, a big beer or a little beer, gravity wise?
I would say the big beer definitely has a few more quirks about it, with just more malt, and our yeast sometimes doesn't always perform the way we want it to, so we treat it a little differently. A little extra aeration on the yeast before we pitch it seems to help. And some of the big beer is definitely a little more difficult. And the hoppy beers, at least on our large system, the hop beers are a lot more work.
On the smaller beers, I guess the challenge is to get enough flavor without them seeming weak at a lower gravity.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Yeah.
Now, this is a Buffalo Bourbon Stout. It's aged in Buffalo Trace barrels for 4 months. Is this a blended beer, or is this straight from the barrel?
No, this is straight from the... Well, yeah, we blended the barrels together, but there was multiple barrels that we filled at the same time with our Imperial Stout. And it turned out really well. We had done it in the past where the bourbon flavor came through way too much, at least for my taste, and a lot of people, I think, agreed. But this one definitely is a lot more mellow, really smooth, but you definitely get the bourbon flavor and aroma from it.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of bourbon in there.
Yeah, I don't know yet.
Oh, here, you have that. I would imagine that, were these barrels, was it the first time that they had been used? Or
the first time by us. Like most distillers, they only use their barrels once. And so we bought a number of barrels from them. We'll use them a couple times.
Chocolate, this is just delicious. I tell it tastes chocolate and vanilla, and it's just wonderful. The bourbon isn't out in front, and that's another thing with homebrews. You get people that'll make homebrews like this, and what they'll do is they'll soak, cubes or chips in bourbon and then dump that in there, and sometimes they get a little too much of the bourbon character in it. This is just wonderful. This is like dessert.
Yeah.
And again, the hops are not at the forefront of this one either.
No, not even close to being in the forefront. But there was a fair amount of IBUs to begin with in this beer. I want to say it was above 30.
And this is 8.5% ABV, it says.
Correct. Yep. This is the Imperial Stout that we're figuring out ways to make it better, or not make it better, but use it, I guess, because we have some extra left over again. And
well, we've got a trunk in the car.
Yeah. Let's load up a barrel or two, right?
We can figure out a way to use it. But again, it's not a syrupy beer. It's not a huge syrupy mouthfeel to this beer. It's nice and clean and even crisp, and it's surprising for a beer of such high gravity.
Right. Yeah, it definitely is. I would say maybe on the lighter side for Imperial Stouts as far as body goes. in its original form. But it's definitely a good beer. We always enjoy making it with a ton of roasted barley. Chocolate malt dominates that flavor for sure. And I believe we use Chinook hops in this beer as well. All right.
Well, it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's delicious. You know, when I use Chinook hops, one of the things that I worry about is that they are very high in alpha, but they also tend to sometimes produce a little bit of a harshness in the bitterness because they are so high. I don't know whether it's the cohumulone or whatever it is, but so I tend to kind of back off on those a little bit. Is there anything you guys do special to keep that from coming up, or is it just the way you balance it in the brew pot?
I think maybe on how we balance it, we try not to overdo it. Like you mentioned, we don't really do anything special. It's just kind of we'll think of an IBU that we want to shoot for and go for that with that said hop. But yeah, we really don't do anything out of the ordinary other than add it during the boil, different times. Vigorous boil always helps for sure.
So what are your typical boils? Are they 90 minutes, something like that? Okay.
Yep, 90-minute boil with a 10-minute whirlpool and 15-minute rest post-whirlpool.
So do you think that the 90-minute boil does something for the wort besides the hop utilization, or are there other things that you're looking for in that longer boil?
Yeah, there's other things, I guess. We're definitely trying to boil off the DMS, real vigorous 90-minute boil. I think hop utilization would come into that. Different beers, we have multiple hop additions during our boil. Reduction as well. We get a good reduction with a 90-minute boil.
Well, whatever you're doing, Jake, it's great.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Really impressed with your beers and really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for stopping by, you guys, and hopefully I can listen to myself on the radio sometime.
Awesome. Thanks again to Jake. Lots of great beer at Odell's. And Jake was nice enough to fix Andy and me up with some beers to take with us. They made it home in the checked baggage. But the sad thing is that I finished off the last one last night, an Odell's IPA. Wonderful stuff. Lots of grapefruit. Just, really good. Okay, now, from a professional brewer, Jake, with no background in home brewing, to two brewers who started brewing at home. Andy and I went to the Great Divide pre-GABF party and cornered two of their brewers, Taylor Rees and Alan Johnson. Alan and Taylor, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio. It's been a couple of years since we've been at Great Divide, and you guys have done a lot of construction. The place looks great. You got a new tasting room. You got a new bottling line. What all's been going on the past 2 years?
Well, things have just really been blowing up for us. We've increased production. We've got 5 new 100-barrel tanks over the last 2 years. We recently just finished a $1.4 million expansion that included a new bottling line as well as expanding our cooler space by about 40%. So, yeah, things are just moving along at warp speed for us.
That's awesome. Let's talk about some of the beers that I've been seeing, coming through press releases, through my email. They're pretty exciting. Even more exciting if we could get them where we live. But but you've got some pretty big beers coming out.
We sure do. I'd say over the last 2 to 3 years, it feels like our focus has been towards more aggressive, more flavorful, sometimes more hoppy beers. That just seems to be what the crew here, brewers, owners, salespeople, we're all into. So that seems to be what we're making lately.
So what are the challenges in brewing those big beers?
Lots of ingredients, heavy buckets of things. Yeah, just long days mostly. A lot of mashing and a lot of milling.
So have you had to modify your system to accommodate those big beers?
No, we just do double mashes for most of our big beers. So mash half, louder that in, and then mash the other half, and then boil.
Wow. So twice as much work.
Yeah, almost.
And that's a good point if you're trying to brew these beers on your own. Instead of just if you at your mash tons limit and you're stuck with 2 gallons, you can in fact mash that 2.5 gallons, run off, and do it again, which is what we do on a major scale. In order to fill a 50-barrel fermenter of one of our bigger beers, that's basically what we do. We fill the kettle halfway, and we start all over, mash again, sparge, and then we get the kettle full, and that way we're able to get a full volume without, we can't afford to have a tank half full. Well, if you're brewing these at home, I know Alan and myself are both home brewers. It's a lot of effort. You take up a whole day to brew. You'd like to have more than 2.5 gallons. So you might as well take the extra 4 hours, do a double mash, fill up your carboy or whatever you happen to be fermenting in.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, if you only have like a 5-gallon mash tun, while you're waiting to upgrade into a bigger mash tun, you can still do those big beers in the volumes that you want. It's just going to take a longer brew day.
Yeah, but you still only have to boil once, which is key.
That's true. Yeah. So 2 mash sessions, 1 boil session, the rest of the day is still the same. That's right. So it's not double the brew day, it's just double that part. Yeah. It's kind of like doing a decoction, I guess.
It is, in some ways it is like that. But obviously our mashes are all single infusion, and but you're putting a lot more effort into the mashing process because you've got to do it twice.
So you've got some oak-aged beers coming out. What have you got along those lines?
Well, we have our oak-aged Yeti Imperial Stout, which we've been doing for about 2 years. It actually originated during GABF. We did, I think, 2 barrels of it, and it was so good. We now do, 50-barrel batches at a time. We did a really small batch of our oak-aged Yeti with espresso, which is really good. We're serving that. And then now we did Stranahan's Whiskey Barrel Aged, our barley wine and our Yeti Imperial Stout. And those, we got, I think, 450 bottles of each, so very, very small batches. They were aged for 20 months, is that right?
I think it ended up being 18, but close enough.
A long time, yes.
So what are the challenges that you've got to think of when using barrel aging, especially with a barrel that's been used for something else before? I mean, you've got to think about balancing those flavors and what those flavors are going to do for you. And have you got to be ready for some surprises?
Our biggest surprise this year was, I think, carbonation. So we went through a lot. Taylor did most of the work on that, but went through a lot of different things with champagne yeast and heat and just a lot of different variables on that.
Well, yeah, and that is, I think that's a challenge we'll learn to face. It was the first time we'd bottle conditioned, and here at the brewery we've done it as home brewers, but that's a challenge for any big beer, I think, especially for the home brewer. And I learned a lot doing that. 1, the champagne yeast I think was key. 2, we had trouble. It was flat for a while, and in the end what we did to get it carbonated was take every single bottle out of the case and let air kind of circulate around each bottle in about an 85-degree room, and that's finally what got the beer carbonated. And it's carbonated great now, perfectly, but it took some time, so there was some challenges. And I think any big beer, that can be a challenge. I think sometimes it's not, sometimes it is. So, that's something to think about. As far as the barrel-aged beers, back to that question, one of the we know from experience, we tried to barrel age a beer in a whiskey barrel that was not much more than 5% alcohol, and it was overwhelmingly, this was years ago, but it was overwhelmingly like whiskey. It was unenjoyable. So I think if you're using a whiskey barrel, you need a beer that's going to stand up to it. Like Alan was saying, we had an Imperial Stout and a barley wine that we used, and those definitely can stand up to it. But even the barley wine, it's got a heavy whiskey character to it, and that's a 10% beer as it is, very malty, very hoppy. So if you're looking at whiskey, you definitely need a beer that can stand up to it. Oak in general, I mean, if you can get an oak, even just straight French, or American oak, you can get an oak bomb if you're putting too much oak in there, it's spending too much time on the oak, or your beer just can't stand up to it from the start. A solution to that problem would be to blend, though. If you have something that's too oaky, just you can always brew another barley wine or stout, don't oak it, blend the two, and you can get something that's, within your liking.
Yeah, in my opinion, your last choice should be throwing away the batch of beer. And it seems like if it can be salvaged for any reason, you should try to do that.
Exactly. I mean, yeah.
Distill it if you have to.
Distill it. There you go.
This is not proper legal advice in the United States. So, have you guys thought about distilling?
No, not on a professional level. It's fun. We have the Stranahan's distillery near us. It's fun to go over there and watch them do it, but it's not something, at least that I'm aware of, that we're looking to get into. The boss might have different ideas, but I haven't heard anything along those lines.
That's a whole different learning curve.
Exactly.
You're also doing at least one Belgian.
Yep, we have Hades is a Belgian-style strong golden ale. It's the first Belgian me and Alan have done. I think way back when Great Divide might have done a wit beer before we even worked here. But that's had challenges as well. And we've learned a lot about just the huge role that yeast plays in Belgian beers, and you hear that over and over again. But Alan can tell you a little bit about some of the fermentation issues, the temperature issues that we had going on. And we didn't have any huge problems, but it changed the character. If you want to talk about that.
Our first two batches this year were only the fourth and fifth that we had ever brewed. We only did 3 last year. So I think the first one we brewed 2 weeks before the second, and the second finished before the first one. We just had major temperature control issues, and then it just dropped so slow. But we blended them, and it was a really, really fantastic batch.
So what was the issue with the temperature? What happened?
We can't be sure. There's so many variables. Could have been oxygen. We could have, I think we waited an extra day to knock the temperature up. So that could have definitely affected it. It had trouble getting back up to temperature. So now we're waiting 1 day, and then letting the yeast kind of go free.
To clarify, what was recommended to us was that we start with this particular yeast strain, that we start at a lower temperature than we normally would, which for us was 17 degrees Celsius, and to give it a few days at that temperature and then turn the glycol up and allow the beer to go up on its own. That basically, what we found is that it was too long. 3 days was too long. So what Alan said is, now we started at 17 degrees and we let it go. After 24 hours, we let it go up, and the profile of the beer changes drastically. The one that took, I think, 3.5 weeks to ferment. 4.5 weeks. Well, one, it was below 1 degree Plato when it finished, right? And it was just dry. It had almost not, we wanted to dry beer for this style, but we didn't get any spiciness, not any fruit really. It was too dry. So, but then now we're getting definitely a little fruitier beer. I believe it's the Hades that's on top today, maybe, or is that the first batch? I'm not sure. But anyways, it changes that small detail of 1 day at 17 or 3 days at 17. It's not that small, but in the grand scheme of things, not a huge deal. Totally changes the profile of the beer. So that's something to think about when you're brewing a Belgian style. Temperature is very important.
Yeah, we've heard in the past, that people brewed with the season, because they might not have had adequate temperature control. And I like to brew Belgians in the summertime because they can get just as hot as they want to. But it seems to me that everybody I've talked to on this says that you've got to control that first critical stage of fermentation, then you can let it go.
And there's reasons for that. You've got a lot of ester production going on in those first initial days, and you do want some esters for sure in Belgian beers. It's one of the great things. But there's other less desirable ones that I can't think of the names off the top of my head. But that initial kind of stunting that yeast growth and fermentation kind of contributes to getting rid of some of those unwanted esters.
And I've heard that it also has also control over or controlling the higher alcohols and the kind of hotter alcohols.
The fusel, yeah. I have heard that as well. I don't have any direct experience though. Even on home brewing, I don't think I've ever had a beer that was too fusely. I could have just been lucky. I've never. So
what has been the biggest change? Have you had any paradigm shifts in change of thinking in going from a home brewer to a professional brewer? Or is it just the same stuff, only bigger?
Well, it's the same stuff, bigger, but there's a lot of different things. Temperature control, pitching yeast, just cell count. There's a million things that I didn't even know about. Even just cleaning the way that we have to clean. Like when I first started homebrewing, I had no concept of the way that I should be cleaning.
Yeah, like Alan said, it is the same thing, but at the same time, your thought process. We do the most insane things to maintain consistency. Just everything we can do to make sure the product that we're making from day to day is the same. Which a lot of people say, oh, that must be kind of boring. I don't think it is. I think it's a challenge. It's a challenge every day for us to get the beer the same. That's the difference. Homebrewing is wonderful, and we both still homebrew from time to time because we want that ability to experiment and have fun. In that sense. But also I've learned, the temperature is a huge thing I never was really aware of as a home brewer. I thought, that only came into play if you wanted a lager. But, so that's a new, definitely a huge thing for me, as well as yeast and pitching correctly. I think I underpitched probably for the first 2 years I homebrewed. And I can remember having, beers that I wasn't happy with, and I'm pretty sure it was just because I wasn't pitching enough yeast at this point, so...
Well, that's awesome. Well, I know you guys are busy. Any last nuggets of wisdom that you want to pass on to homebrewers out there?
Well, in case you missed that last point, make sure you're pitching enough yeast, especially with high alcohol beers. I think we had a homebrew contest of high alcohol beers, and that was one of the things, the ones that kind of didn't make the grade. We're pretty sure the only thing we could tell is that it tasted like the yeast was stressed out and that it might not have even finished. So, make a starter if you have to. If you've got the dough, just buy, a multiple vials or packets of yeast, whatever you're doing. But get that pitching rate up. Make sure you're pitching enough yeast.
Beers, most ales should finish in 5 days, I didn't know that. I had beers going for weeks, and I thought they were fine. One nugget of wisdom that it's really hard to do, but keep it simple. I find that, you're like, oh, I'll throw a handful of this, I'll throw just a tiny bit of that, oh, a little chocolate, a little biscuit, bad idea. Just keep it simple. Each hop addition at maximum 2 different varieties. Each hop addition, you really need 1 hop variety. If you're using more than 5 malts, you're probably got too many. And that's for an insane beer, really simple recipes always yield the best beers, in my opinion.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What great folks. Beer people are just good folks. We had a lot of fun at Great Divide and had the chance to meet a bunch of listeners there. And, by the way, Taylor wanted to add afterwards, after the interview, that aeration is also very important to successful brewing. So I have to agree. We have lots more stuff to come from our trip to Colorado. I'll be featuring that content in the coming weeks, along with other great stuff on tap, so stay tuned for that. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on basicbrewingshop.com, where you can see Steve Wilkes do a single-step decoction mash, and follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer, where I don't use a dedicated chest freezer. But if you do have a chest freezer, we'll still show you how to lager. There are also our original DVDs. In Basic Brewing, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, we walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing, Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks. We have a new DVD coming out soon. Also, our Brewers logbooks will be out there before too long. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We got shirts. Don't forget to send your picture of yourself in a cool place with your shirt. Also, thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Bayou Classic SP10 High-Pressure Outdoor Gas Cooker, Propane. All right, now we're talking. And Apple iPod Nano 8GB Purple, 4th generation. You know, those two go well together. I don't have the purple one, but, you know, I do have the iPod. It goes well cooking outside or brewing outside. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what on the Amazon thingy, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. We also have that associate link to the Apple Store on the site, too. Well, that's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson down in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long.